Let's go ahead and start recording. Terrific. Welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Mona Mangat. I am the Vice President of Safety and Justice Efforts nationally at LISC, and thrilled that all could join us. It's wonderful to see some familiar names on the call here, and really look forward to not just joining us, but really engaging with us on the chat and through questions today, as we know it's just a really interesting topic, and we have a tremendous speaker. So today's webinar, as you all know, is focused on brain science, trauma, and supporting change. We have several webinars actually planned over the next few weeks in the area of CVI, and we really hope that you'll join us at those. And we're also going to be sharing the recordings of today's webinar and the upcoming ones. And we ask that you please distribute that to colleagues and partners that could not attend today. And we'll stay active in the chat, sharing resources and updates from upcoming webinars and information that will be really valuable just as complements to today's conversation. Understanding the critical role of science around brain development and the impact of trauma and community violence really creates opportunities for partners and the work that you all are doing to create programming that is leading to very meaningful and substantial change and sustainable change in the individuals that you all are working with. That has been really clear, and a message heard loud and clear to us from our engagement with ROCA, who deeply understand the role of credible, trusted partners, and that must be much more than engagement. I'm sure you'll hear about it today, but they often talk about the then what after making the initial connection to individuals, and really making it connected to the violence and victimization that those are experiencing. This work takes time, it takes years, it takes ups and downs, and it really takes this real understanding of the science behind this. So it's an incredible opportunity for us to be able to bring this knowledge to you all. As a TTE provider for the Burn Criminal Justice Innovation Program, we have been really fortunate to partner with BCJI and support sites across the country. And we know how many have for years been implementing CVI work, but also the growing work that is just beginning around the kind of continuation of BCJI partnerships. So we're thrilled to bring a BCJI partner here and to really just share some of the lessons learned and really have you all chime in with your questions and experiences as well. To lead this conversation and really share their experience and their best practices, we are joined by James Timpson. He is the Director for Community Partnership and Safety for ROCA Maryland and ROCA Impact Institute. JT is the Director of Youth Work and Crisis Intervention for ROCA Baltimore. And in his last role as liaison officer for Safe Streets Baltimore, he was responsible for providing oversight and technical assistance to the directors of 5 community Safe Streets sites. He is the former site director for the Safe Streets Park Heights in Baltimore as well. So I will quickly turn this over to JT, and we'll be actively moderating and looking at the chat for Q&A, raised hands, and other opportunities. So JT, I will turn to you for the next segment.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'm going to let my colleague also joining me, Anisha, introduce herself, and then I'll take it from there.
Good afternoon, Anisha Chabani Medley, also with the ROCA Impact Institute, and we're just thrilled to be with you all today.
So we're going to talk about brain science and support and change. The work that we do with the young people that we service is really based in understanding brain science and understanding the trauma that our young people face and suffer each and every day. And I really didn't understand the importance of this connection until I understood it, until I understood the effect that it was having on the young people that we were working with, until I could actually see the trauma through a brain science lens with young people that we were working with each and every day. Did I really start to understand the significance of understanding this and helping other people doing the work understand the connection of this trauma, the brain science, and the behaviors that we see our young people carry out each and every day. So with that, I'll get started. Steph, thank you. So again, you just heard an introduction of who I am and who my colleague Anisha is. We'll talk a little bit about who we are as ROCA, though. We can go to the next slide. So this is our mission, really. It's about us being relentless force in disrupting incarceration, poverty, and racism by engaging young adults, police, and systems at the center of urban violence. But really, it's about addressing the collaborative system that actually affects our young people. So again, you see we have it broken down, talking about the relationships where we have to address all these different entities. And we include our engaged institutions, our partners, on that list very high up as well, because they need to understand how to work with our young people as well as we do. So as we learn, we try to share the learning with others so that we can all learn to service our young people a lot better. And so our mission, as you see here, we work with 16 to 24-year-olds who've experienced extensive levels of trauma. So ROCA overall is about 33, 34 years old. I think actually we're going with 34, getting ready to go on 35 years old as an organization. We have five sites in Massachusetts, one in Baltimore, and a new program that we actually just started in Connecticut. And so we're going to show you a video that shows you just a little bit about the model and how we go about the approach.
Think about how you got here. Odds are you had a good start. Family, guidance, chances to fail and overcome. ROCA gives that kind of support to the highest risk young people, the 17 to 24-year-olds in gangs or in jail who keep the police busy, who need change but aren't ready yet. Take Andre. He just got out of jail. A ROCA youth worker, Eric, knocks on his door. At first, Andre is like, yeah, right. But ROCA's relentless. Eric never stops reaching out. Eventually, Andre begins to trust Eric and comes to ROCA. He gets a job on our work crews, takes high school classes, and learns critical work and life skills. Then once again, Andre slips. He stops coming. He gets fired. He avoids ROCA and gets in trouble. But ROCA's ready. We know setbacks are part of the process. Eric stays on Andre and keeps bringing him back until Andre learns he can stumble, recover, and keep going. Eric works with Andre's probation officer and the police. Together, they support and push Andre, helping him move forward. After 4 years with ROCA, Andre knows how to work. He has goals and the tools to make it. Working in the streets for 3 decades, ROCA has helped thousands of young people change their lives. For them, we have to improve every day. So we track and analyze everything. Every knock on a door, every class, every failure, and accomplishment. Data keeps us accountable. Data proves ROCA works. Take a look. Our continued success depends on you. Support ROCA so we can help more young people prove that change is possible.
So that's just a little bit about the model and what we do. So here is our 4 pillars of kind of the way we operate. Number 1 is really about creating that safety and sustainability, and we do that through our relentless outreach and the way that we build our transformational relationships. We understand that because we deal with young people that are so deep in, that are so heavily involved in the criminal justice system or so heavily involved in the street life, that we know that we have to be able to build strong relationships with them to really be able to challenge them on the behaviors that we want to see change. The whole model is built across sites, is really built in behavior change. And this is part of the process that we use to help us reach that behavior change. It takes our young people quite a while to get there. It's a 4-year model, but it takes our young people about 2 years before we actually start seeing sustained behavior change. The way that we really foster that behavior change is through our use of CBT. We really view our cognitive behavioral theory as life-saving skills that really help young people develop the ability to make different decisions or to make better decisions that keep them out of harm's way over time. And I say over time because it takes time. It's not an overnight process, and we expect relapse to be a part of that process. We expect them to go through a lot of setbacks, but we know that we have to support them through that change because they're so highly traumatized. They're so used to being told no. They're so used to systems closing doors and turning their back on them that we really understand that we have to support them through that behavior change, no matter what it looks like. And so we incorporate relapse and a lot of practice. The CBT skills that we teach our young people, we have to continuously practice them with them over and over again so that we can eventually see the behavior change that we're looking for. And then lastly, if we talk about the engaged institutions and systems, it's really important for us to help systems understand how their work also affects the outcomes or the impact of or has an impact on the young people that we service. So working closely with partners to understand exactly what we're going to talk about here today, brain science and the effect of trauma on our young people is just as critical as helping our young people understand how it affects them. Go to the next slide, please. So again, today, we're coming to you from the Roca Impact Institute, and this is just basically our mission, is really to equip institutions and individuals that are working with these young people who are at the center of urban violence with the tools and strategies to address that trauma and to improve those outcomes. We do this through training and trauma-informed interventions because we want to share what we've learned. We want to help spread the knowledge of some of the practices and some of the things that we learned over the years. Facilitation, design, and implementation of focused, coordinated approaches to support agencies and systems change. Again, that's about working with those larger systems that may be interested in how to better service the young people that they're engaging with. And then we also do intensive coaching to build staff capacity and sustains change in agencies and systems. That's that we do our CBT Rewire course. And after that, it's not just a course where we train you and then say, there you go, you got it, and we're gone. We really work with the programs, our partners, to really learn how to implement it in a way that best benefits you as the service providing agency to the specific young people or population that you're serving. So today we're going to talk about this brain science. So the key concepts we want to understand is that in order to prevent or reduce violence, we must understand brain science. We have to understand what trauma really is and what it looks like. For us, today we're defining trauma as the fear that won't turn off, because it's constantly there, it's persistent. But we also want to walk away understanding that change is possible, but it takes time and practice. Time and practice. And the way that we do that is through our cognitive behavioral theory-based approaches, which help us identify and disrupt those unhelpful patterns that we all go through. We all suffer from these unhelpful patterns, but it also helps support the behavior change while we help address those unhelpful patterns. So we start with just understanding the brain. We know that we have a top brain and a bottom brain. This is the way that we think about it. Our top brain is our thinking brain. Well, let me start with the bottom. My bottom brain is our control center, right? It's responsible for processing our information. It's responsible for our survival. You see our basic functions, right? Swallowing, heartbeat, startle response. Then we have that middle brain, which stores our emotions and our motivation and our sensory intake feelings, right? We like to believe that the majority of the young people that we service are highly traumatized, so they're living in that bottom brain, which we call that survival brain. The goal really is for us to be able to move them from that survival brain to the top brain, which we call the thinking brain. We want them to be able to reach that executive function. We want them to be able to formulate better thoughts and ideas around certain situations or circumstances that they're actually going through. We want to move them from that survival brain, which is where those automatic responses are stored and come out, into that survival brain, into the top brain, which is the thinking brain. So our brain's main purpose is to keep us alive, and it's geared to scan for threats and danger, and prime our bodies to respond quickly, right? So by understanding that, we know that this survival brain constantly gets triggered, right? We sense a threat, a fear, our body goes into a fear response. Our survival brain kicks us into a fear response. When we get kicked into those survival brain, we feel disrespected. When we feel disrespected, we don't feel in control of situations. A lot of us know that the population of the young people we deal with are very high in respect, and they always want to be in control. But the reality of it is because of the conditions of their brain, oftentimes they aren't in control and they feel out of control, and it comes out in their behaviors. It comes out in the things that they do. But we have to help them understand how to be able to recognize that based on the trauma that they suffered. So for all of us, regardless of the job that we do or where we grew up or what we look like, our brain senses threat or real or perceived, right? It sounds an alarm, it kicks us into our bottom brain that helps us survive. There's no conscious thinking going on, and our top brain functions is offline, right? So what we want to do really is to be able to address that trauma so that those automatic responses don't kick in and that top brain can stay online or go online. We don't want the top brain to be offline, but a lot of people, when our fear responses kick in and we sense that threat, the top brain is completely offline, right? So responding to that threat, our bodies are kicked into that survival response, which is what fight, flight, or freeze oftentimes look like. It's a full body response. We get kicked into our survival brain, we feel it. We feel hot, we feel our pressure rise, our muscles get tense. You know, we have certain feelings that go, certain physical feelings that actually go along with being kicked into survival brain or when that fight, flight, or freeze kicks in. So if you think about it, and we just talked about it, what does it feel like when you get triggered in your body, right? We've all been there. We all have gotten upset. We all get triggered about certain things. But what does it feel like? And I'm sure that we can identify with certain feelings or emotions that, or certain actual feelings, not even emotions, certain feelings that we may have in our body that automatically happen when we get triggered. For me, I sweat. I sweat when I get triggered. You know, my forehead gets tight, my head gets tight. You know, I can actually feel it in my body. And then, so with that being said, imagine what it looks like for our young people. What does that look like for our young people when they're kicked into their survival brain, right? Their survival brain responses look a lot like their behaviors or the things that they do or the way that they respond or react, right? So this is one of my favorite parts here is really understanding trauma, right? Trauma is that fear that won't turn off. If we think about trauma and how it actually affects us or how it actually affects our young people, we know that we all have experienced fear. We all been afraid, feeling uncomfortable, scared, powerless. Trauma, again, is identified as that fear that won't turn off. Trauma is always having that fear, always having that fear. Imagine living life where you're always having fear. It never turns off, right? Trauma has a profound effect on how the brain functions over time. So if that continuously happens over time, just think about the effect that it has on your ability to make decisions or rational decisions. So Dr. Alicia Moreland Kapua, who you see here pictured here, she says the process and impact of fear is one that every human being has experienced. Imagine if the natural fear response never turns off. Persistent fear that never turns off is the neurobiological definition of trauma. Right? Now think about that. A persistent fear that never turns off. When we really understand the effects of trauma and what it does to us by understanding like what's actually happening, a persistent fear, right? Consider the psychological burden of living in fear every day, feeling like you are in a state of fight, flight, or freeze, and or seeking safety every waking moment of the day. And we wonder why these behaviors are exhibited, or we see the certain type of behaviors that we see exhibited in our young people. Because this is the burden that majority of them bear when they are so traumatized. When their lives and their brains have been introduced to so much trauma, this is the daily burden that they bear. And that's not to be taken lightly, right? Seeking safety every waking moment of the day. Imagine living like that. That's a tough burden to actually bear, but this is what trauma does to our young people. So trauma changes the way the brain actually physically develops and functions. We talked about that a little bit. Traumatic responses can easily be triggered by a look, a sound, smell, thought, or touch and drive reactive behaviors. I've been in plenty of situations where people have responded to, or people know when a gun has been fired because the smell of it is still in the air. You can tell, like, oh man, like, dang, somebody shot a gun around here recently, because you can literally tell, right? And for some people, that smell sends them into a trauma response because they've either been shot or they've been close by somebody who got shot, and that's one of the first things that they smelled was the gunpowder, right? Or the sound. We see it all the time. You hear pop, 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 and you see how people react. They scatter, they duck, they jump, they hide. Those are all trauma responses. Those are reactive behaviors that are driven by trauma. And then the unaddressed trauma is actually what keeps us stuck in survival mode, right? So when we understand the brain science and the impact of trauma, we can actually find a meaningful and effective ways to show up and support change and reduce violence. And this is what it's all about. How can we take what we know about trauma, use that in a meaningful way to really support behavior change, reduce violence, but still being able to address the trauma of a young person, or address the trauma that the people who we deal with have suffered, including ourselves. So I love this quote here. It talks about what trauma looks like. Trauma decontextualizing a person looks like personality. Trauma decontextualized in a family looks like family traits. And then trauma decontextualized and trauma in people decontextualized looks like culture. If you don't put the context behind the meaning of something, then you'll often get it wrong. And this is why the decontextualization of trauma in so many different ways causes just a totally inaccurate perception or totally inaccurate thought process of people or what we see. Because that means that we're actually assimilating their trauma to their behaviors. And we are not our behaviors, right? What traumatic responses look like is ongoing traumatic experience stored in the body, keeps us in that consistent state of tension, ready to explode, hypersensitivity to threatened dangers, challenges with trust and relationships, harder time identifying and managing emotions. How many of these things can we actually identify that we know that either we see in ourselves for us who have been traumatized, or that we see in young people who we know deal with a lot of this stuff on a daily basis or on a regular basis, right? When you look at this list, I know that for us who do direct service or have done direct service, you can almost name a young person with this popping up in your head. Somebody's name is probably popping up in your head that you can identify with this list of stuff that we see here. Because a lot of times we make the excuse of, the mistake of actually identifying young people with their behaviors, or they become known by their behaviors, and we're not our behaviors. These are trauma responses. So, again, we know that change takes time, right? So when we first started to understand more about the impact of trauma on our young people, we started to do things different. We started to coach our youth workers in a different way by helping them really understand that we talk about practice and repeat the process and being relentless. We really, really mean that. It's not about one conversation that you have with a young person and think that because you said it or because you are who you are, that they're all of a sudden going to change their behaviors now. It's not the way that it works. Trauma is bigger than my ego, and trauma is bigger than who I think I am, or who I think I am to this young person. So it's really about me being able to take the practice of these skills and really help young people work through that trauma. And not just one time. It's not one conversation. This is about continuously going back and continuously working through those situations, continuously allowing young people to mess up, continuously allowing them to deal with their trauma responses, but helping them see it along the way, right? We need good tools and strategies to support them long term. And it takes time. But the most important thing is that with the right time and effort, that change is possible. But we really have to believe that, and we really have to put in the work to actually make the change happen. Yeah. So we have the capacity to heal from trauma, even though we talked about what trauma does to the brain, right? We talked about the negative effects of it, how it keeps us stuck in these auto responses. And a lot of these auto responses come from our survival brain, which means that most of those auto responses that come from our survival brain look negative. They're generally negative responses to trauma responses, right? They're generally negative responses. But we can change. Our brains can heal. We have the capacity to heal from our trauma and change. And we can literally rewire our brain through neuroplasticity. Now, this is where it really gets challenging for me when I start talking about neuroplasticity. I'm by no means a scientist, no means an expert in brain science or any of this, but I do understand the importance of addressing the trauma, continuously being persistent in using CBT, and how that actually changes the brain. So we're going to look at a quick clip here. I think the clip is next. It shows us a little bit about neuroplasticity and what actually happens.
Not so long ago, many scientists believed that the brain did not change after childhood, that it was hardwired and fixed by the time we became adults. But recent advances in only the last decade now tell us that this is simply not true. The brain can and does change throughout our lives. It is adaptable, like plastic. Hence, neuroscientists call this neuroplasticity. How does neuroplasticity work? If you think of your brain as a dynamic, connected power grid, there are billions of pathways or roads lighting up every time you think, feel, or do something. Some of these roads are well-travelled. These are our habits, our established ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Every time we think in a certain way, practice a particular task, or feel a specific emotion, we strengthen this road. It becomes easier for our brains to travel this pathway. Say we think about something differently, learn a new task, or choose a different emotion. We start carving out a new road. If we keep travelling that road, our brains begin to use this pathway more, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The old pathway gets used less and weakens. This process of rewiring your brain by forming new connections and weakening old ones is neuroplasticity in action. The good news is that we all have the ability to learn and change by rewiring our brains. If you have ever changed a bad habit or thought about something differently, you have carved a new pathway in your brain and experienced neuroplasticity firsthand. With repeated and directed attention towards your desired change, you can rewire your brain.
So we talked a little bit about understanding the right tools and strategies to be able to use to actually help people's brains heal from trauma. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to even understand the brain science, because we can't know what tools actually work or how to use tools or what tools to even look for if we don't really understand what's happening. And so neuroplasticity really gives us a good understanding of why we use CBT, our cognitive behavior theory, and why it was created the way that it was. We know that neuroplasticity, the brain science tells us that it works best at certain points in times in life where your brain is more pliable. For our population, that 16 to 24-year-old range is one of those time periods where it's best for brain change or to form new neural pathways. So that's part of the reason why we deal with the population in that age range that we deal with. And then also the reason why we use our cognitive behavior theory, because what we want young people to really be able to understand through this is that there's a connection between what they think and what they feel and what they do. And oftentimes the trauma causes that, the trauma that they suffered causes that not to be clear, causes them not to really understand it. causes them just to think of these things separately. But the point of CBT is to really help people understand the connection between their thoughts, feelings, and actions, right? We know that situations happen. Everything in life is a situation. They happen all the time. But what we think in our head, what we feel in our bodies, and what we do in response to it is what's key, right? These become our automatic responses. So we get caught in our thinking and feeling and responding the same way just based on the way we were brought up or the way that we were brought up to understand certain things. Some things we were taught that if this happens, you're supposed to respond this way, right? Not really understanding why. Why am I supposed to respond this way to this particular event? And over time, you just start responding to things automatically, right? But there is a relation between what you think and what you feel and what you do. And so CBT helps us understand and identify when we get caught in the cycle of what we think, feel, and do. Because a lot of times that connection between what we think, feel, and do can become really unhelpful, right? And it can cause us to spin because we get caught in what we think, feel, and do, and we lose control, and we get caught in this spinning, unhelpful cycle. So you're thinking crazy, it's causing you to feel crazy, and it's causing you to want to do something crazy. But if you think about if you were able to pause and just put a break in there, say, hey, I'm having this crazy thought. It's causing me to feel this way, but hold up, boom. Let me stop for a minute and not let that make me behave in a certain way. Right? Or, all right, I'm thinking a certain way. Let me interrupt this thought so I don't start feeling this certain way. And then, because I know once I start feeling like this, then I'm just going to do X, Y, Z. Right? So I know if I get mad, boy, I'm going to go get the gun. And when I pick the gun up, somebody going to get it. Right? So how do we disrupt that? Because we really want them to be able to pause, disrupt that cycle, and be able to do something different than the way they normally do things, right? And so over time with that repeated practice and disrupting those cycles and those old patterns and doing something different, we actually increase their ability to change. But it's really about helping them being able to identify that cycle and understand that if you take that pause, you have the possibility to be able to do something different. So I'll show you an example of what an actual cycle, an actual think, feel, do cycle looks like, right? This is an example of a young person that gets called out on social media, all too familiar for us. So the thought is no one's ever going to disrespect me like that. So I'm feeling enraged and disrespected. So I start getting loud and making comments. I'm spinning. Now I'm thinking that's effed up, right? So now I'm feeling anxious and I'm stressed. Now I have to do what I got to do. I'm determined. So what am I going to do? I'm going to drive across town with a gun to shoot up the block they were in on that live that they was talking to me about, or that they were talking about me, right? But the key is, what if you could slow down? What if you could slow down and disrupt that cycle? What if you could change the way that they thought or the way that they perceived even what was happening? Then your outcome may be drastically different, right? You stop, you rewind a little. Imagine if you caught the cycle earlier, what could be different? Well, you might not have drove across town. You might have had different thoughts about the whole process, right? You might have decided, you know what, they weren't even, well, actually, they didn't say my name. I just figured they was talking about me because they always do, right? It's a bunch of different things that could happen if you actually took the time to examine what could happen differently if I actually stop that cycle. So this is what we commonly talk about, is the ability to learn these different tools and skills to slow down and make different choices, right? Because often our think, feel, do cycles are automated responses, and they come from our traumatic experiences. And we keep responding in the same harmful way over and over and over again based on those traumatic experiences. But if we practice helping young people and ourselves identify these cycles, the more when they happen, we'll be able to identify them quicker over time, right? And if we can identify quicker, we can stop them, we can disrupt them by using one of the skills that we referenced briefly, the CBT skills, right? This gives us the opportunity to make a choice instead of reacting, and it allows us to heal or to fix the unhelpful patterns of behavior, right? Because it's really about seeing the cycle and stopping it, and then being able to address what's going on in that cycle. You use the skills to be able to, as a real live tool, to be able to address that situation as it's happening. And then the best part about the whole process is that it still allows a person at the end to make a choice. Because skill building is not about telling people what to do. Skill building is just that. It's equipping people with the tools to make decisions for themselves. And what we want to do is continuously help our young people heal their brains, heal that trauma, so that they can make better decisions for themselves with the right tools, with the right support. Remember, we said that behavior change is possible with the right support, right? You have to be able to support them and be willing to support them along the way. So this is a little thing of what we asked our young people about their relationship with Roka and CBT. Most of them will tell you that we beat CBT in their head. Like, man, they always talking about that CBT. Oh, man, CBT, da, da, da. But you're going to get to see for yourself what a few of our young people think.
I'm not used to having like people around, period. Like, you feel me, that'll help you out and not want anything back from the help, you feel what I'm saying? Or either just be there for you normally, like every day, just to check on you. I didn't like it because I wasn't used to it. I think CBT is really how can I put this? It's a mind thing for us, you feel what I'm saying? It really make us think more, you know what I mean? And it is helping us get back to the level where we want to be.
They gotta let you know what the CBT stands for. They gotta let you know the meaning. It's just not something that they can throw at you and say, go home and read this paper and it's gonna be all right. No, it ain't like that. It take for you to get fired at a work job to find out that there's a lot in you to tell you that you can get rehired. It's all in yourself.
The first time, being honest, I like, for what? For what? Like, what are you trying to implement these skills in me for? Like, I know how to deal with certain things. I didn't see a use for them. It definitely changed. Now when I look at it, it's something I actually do. Like, just certain skills I know really work when you make them work. So, and then CBT was another thing, like just them knocking on the door. Like, you couldn't be with somebody and not hear about CBT. Like, that was the Bible.
He was saying it was the Bible to Roka, right? The CBT. Because we really believe that that's what really gives our young people a chance for change and a chance to heal that trauma. And that's the way that we really support them through that behavior change. The 7 skills, we call them the 7 life-saving skills, because they really help young people think differently. But it takes practice and it takes time, and repeated practice and time over and over again. But it is definitely has helped our young people, and we've seen it make a lot of changes for them. So, just reviewing the key concepts. In order to prevent violence or reduce violence, we must understand the brain science, which we talked about a little bit. We also talked about the fact that trauma is that fear that won't turn off, right? We also talked about change being possible, but it taking time and practice. Again, we have to put the time into practicing. And then our cognitive behavior theory-based approaches help us identify and disrupt those unhelpful patterns and support behavior change. So I hope we could see the clear lines of understanding how it starts from that bottom survival brain to those automated responses that young people make based on the trauma that they've suffered and based on being stuck in that survival brain. They make these automated responses. They have this think, feel, do cycle that's very negative and very harmful, right? Because of the trauma. But with neuroplasticity, we know that we can heal that. And we know that we can help them rewire their brains and form new neural pathways, new ways of thinking to be able to reach that top brain, which is that executive functioning. And we do that with the use of the tool, with tools like CBT. But along with that, we have to understand that relapse is inevitable. It's going to happen, and it's going to take time for these young people to change. But we have to be the supporting catalyst that helps them change and continuously provide them with the tools and the skills that they need to be able to disrupt those unhelpful think, feel, do cycles. So when they get stuck in those think, feel, do cycles, we like to use skills in real life situations with young people. When it's a real situation or real incident happening and that trauma's rooting its head up, the trauma is there on 10. You know, we really want to dig in there, anchor down in CBT and really help that young person work through that cycle. What's got you feeling that way? Because I could see you there, right? How can we help you move through this? What can we do to support you? But not just saying it, what does it really look like? Sometimes it looks like letting a young person act out. I watched a young lady the other day outside my office window just yelling and screaming, and she literally just jumped up in the air and threw her body on the ground and just start shaking on the ground. It's because she couldn't even identify with what she was feeling. She was just so traumatized and so emotional that it just completely took over her body. And those were automated responses. Those were automated trauma responses just pouring out of her body. And she's literally just jumping into, to the point of probably hurting herself. But it was an automated response, right? And we have to understand how powerful trauma is and how powerful the impact of trauma is on our young people. And using CBT really helps us counteract that or helps us combat it, because now they have a tool or they have a skill that they can refer back to in those situations, or something that they can think about, or a support system in place to help address that unaddressed trauma, number one. And then two, to help them continuously through the practice, rewire their brain so that we can get them to that executive function, right? Or that top brain, which helps them think better. What we don't expect is that they're going to go from sinner to saint. That's not what we're asking, right? We're asking for behavior change. We just want to see behavior change, because over time, as they start to experience life differently or see things differently, over time, as that trauma starts to heal, the behaviors will start to match. And that's really the goal that we're aiming for, is to really be able to address that trauma. But we have to understand the physiological effects of trauma and the brain science on the front end. And until I really understood that, when I understood brain science, I'll never forget sitting in the classroom one day, Anisha was teaching the class on brain science, and it hit me. I said, "Whoa." And I literally started thinking the names of people just start popping in my head, and I was associating the people with the behavior. And that's what we often do. But remember, we want to always remind people that we are not our behaviors. So I was associating people with behaviors when I really should have just been associating them with the trauma response. It was just a trauma response, right? And so understanding that really helps us be able to understand this landscape of violence and understand what we're working toward with this reduction, by really helping our young people understand trauma and how it affects them. Anisha, do you have anything you want to add in to the end right there? We got any questions, comments?
I see Anisha. Oh, go ahead, Anisha.
Yeah, no, I think we can just go to questions, and I'll hand it over to you, Mona.
That's great. Yeah, so I just want to review the one question that was in the chat and really open it up. I think I have the panelists pulled up, so please just raise your hand, unmute, or also put items in the chat. One important question that came in was, in case you haven't seen it, is just somebody is asking about, they work with 8th graders who are 14, and just thinking about the age group, the way that you explained, the category of age that you work with, which is 16 and up. So Anisha, I don't know if you just want to more publicly respond to that, so everyone can have an understanding of, working with younger, in this case, students.
Sure. And just to say, like, over its history, Rook has worked with a wide range of young people. As we in the early 2000s, we were really focusing on young people at the center of violence. At that time, the age group was older young adults, right? So we then really honed in on these 17 to 24-year-olds. Obviously, violence changes in communities. Young people change and what impacts them. We do have some pilots with some younger folks, mostly in our Massachusetts sites right now. There are some younger folks, I think, being served in Baltimore, but they're really, as referred to us by our criminal justice, our criminal partners, institution partners, the police and the court systems, because we want to make sure the risk level is where it needs to be. But developmentally, those younger ones, under 14, probably need a different type of program, much more time intensive to build where they are developmentally. And so we haven't dropped lower than that yet. But we think some of the same strategies that we're using can work for the 14 to 16-year-olds, and we are doing some pilots with them now, with some adaptations that mostly that include a little bit more intensive on the family side, and obviously school and juvenile probation.
Yeah. I'm going to start with a few questions or thoughts that I have, and we'll pause anytime we see other questions come in. One thought is this idea of it's so compelling to see the videos and hear the youth themselves speak around CBT and what it has done. Can you talk a little bit about the training and sharing the brain science and trauma understanding with partners, like law enforcement partners, other social service providers? For us as a TTE provider, it's usually it's never really a singular organization coming out this work to support youth or their families or whatever the violence intervention is. So would love to get an understanding of perspectives of partners when they're exposed to this and what the value is of that.
You want to take that? You want me?
You can take it. I mean, I can fill it. You can take it.
So I'll start, and then JT can jump in. I mean, again, what was fundamentally clear for us is that working with this particular population, we can't do it without working with the other adults who are engaged with them, right? The people, police, probation, the intensive emergency care folks, other service providers. So part of being able to do this different was being able to help share this information with those folks, right? Because so much of how our system is set up and so much of how our young people are set up in those systems is because people aren't actually using this data, right? So it's a very simple example. Young person on probation is given, particular mandates that can only actually work for someone who's ready, willing, and able, or in an action state, or not kind of living in that constant bottom brain, fear, paranoid survival mode, right? It would take a lot for someone who's in that place to be as compliant as they would have to be. And so trying to help our partners understand that so we can actually work with them to work with young people where they actually are. And so we do it individually with our partners, youth workers would help one-on-one with probation officers. We would do it, systemically, from trying to engage with the leadership in those institutions to really have those conversations and help them understand the perspective. And there's been a lot of amazing results as a result of that sharing. In some parts of in different communities that ROCA works in, different things have come of that, like young adult court in certain places has kind of risen up as a result of some of these partnerships and young adult committees that we've pulled together to really share that information. A partnership with a hospital to really help shooting victims right away has come up in one of our sites. So these kind of things help people have better information to go, oh, okay, it makes a little more sense about what's going on, and how do we do something different to actually create some possibility for these young people to do something different.
Yeah, so part of it too is like I work with DJS here in Baltimore, for example, helping after working with DJS for a while and, them seeing how we case manage the young people, working closely with agents, being a part of our circle process and attending a couple of CBT trainings, they felt like it would be valuable for all of their staff to be trained in CBT. So right now we're in the process of training the Department of Juvenile Services in the state of Maryland in CBT, right? Because it's important as a partner, they understood that there was some value in changing or looking at the way in which they service their youth to get the better outcomes as well. So us working collaboratively to figure out like, how can we help better support you in the work that you're doing, trying to help keep young people in compliance? Well, we know that young people in compliance, they're generally safer, right? We don't think about it from the law enforcement aspect of it. We think about it from a safety aspect, right? My job, I want to keep young people alive and safe. And I want to do that the best way possible, but I don't want them to be re-traumatized or re-victimized along the way, right? So how do we do that in a way that's authentic, in a way that really fosters the best well-being for that young person? And that's to work closely with our partners who deal with our young people to really help them understand maybe the benefits or the negative effects of the way that they're operating with young people. Can't say that it's all negative, right? And so DJS has been a good example of a very willing partner here in Maryland to be able to come to the table and say, hey, look, we're willing to, let's train our staff in the CBT approach and see how that works with their engagement with young people. And, so I think the collaboration piece is really important. If you asked me about working with law enforcement or working this closely with justice partners years ago, I would have told you, oh, you got the wrong person, not me, right? I'd have ran the other way. But I do understand that in order for us to achieve our true goal, which is to really keep young people alive, we have to deal with the partners who deal with them the most, even if it makes us uncomfortable, or even if we start from an uncomfortable place with working with those partners. We have to figure out how to collaboratively change the narrative and make it really about us and a we instead of a us and them. Because that's not what it's about. Because when it's us and them, young people die, right? When it's we can work together to help keep young people alive and safe, and really give them a true chance at change. But if systems don't change, then it's going to be hard just to ask young people to change. So the real important part is to look at systems while we're looking at young people, seeing how we can blend all this together to really foster or support some true overall change for the young people.
Yeah, one other example just to share is, we've been training police partners in Massachusetts and Baltimore in a shortened version of Rewire called Rewire 4. Because one of the things we know, look, if you've done youth work with this group, well, we get triggered in the bottom brain, right? This stuff applies to all of us. And this has helped a lot of us learn how to engage differently with young people. And so part of that learning too was like, okay, how do we help people understand, like, it's just not personal. Like, they're not doing this to be disrespectful. How do we help you understand this? And how do we help you pay attention to your own triggers? So, if you can engage differently, and use some of these skills, it might actually change the way in which an interaction goes. And so that it's been a really amazing process. There's been, a couple hundred police officers across Massachusetts and Baltimore trained over the past, 9 to 12 months. And there's, more to be done there, right? But there's small steps, but the more that people understand about, look, it's not all this logical, thought out, manipulative, planned out, constructed, activity towards you personally, right? Most of what happens and what's going on with our young people are these automated responses as a result of them trying to survive, as a result of the situations that they've experienced. And so how do we all shift slightly so because if we don't start doing something different, they can't.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You just mentioned it a lot in talking about the educating of partners, exposing them to this information, and kind of working the essential need to work across these teams. For all of us doing this work, this work is funded, right? And we're fortunate sometimes to have the government funded that can be limited, but allows us to have dollars behind this for up to 3 years. When you think about private funding, it's even less. Sometimes it's within a year. Sort of 2 years feels like a stretch, and even then, the funders want to see the metrics, the data behind it. That makes it really complicated for the work that you're explaining, particularly because of that commitment to relentless engagement, but just the fact that time and practice, the trauma is always there, right? This takes time. I think you even mentioned the program being 4 years. So can you've done an incredible job at Roca expanding the work across places, across cities. How are you articulating that message? What is your advice to partners who have this fixed time to get this work done? What are some kind of models or tips you can share with them?
I mean, it's tough, but I mean, I think part of it is helping people face the reality of what is, right? This is not an overnight process. And if you're looking for that, you're not going to get the results that you desire anyway, right? So you're not going to get the bang for your investment anyway if you're looking for something that's unrealistic. If we're talking about specifically for our population now, we're talking about the kids who are at the highest risk. So that means they're deeply criminally involved. That they're most likely your next victim or perpetrator of violence, right? And so it didn't take them 6 months to become that. So it doesn't take 6 months to get them out of becoming that, right? They've witnessed this a lot of them have witnessed things or seen things that have become traumatized over the course of their life. We know that scientifically, it tells us about 18 months to 2 years to see, some sustained behavior change. So it would make sense that at least if we even just relied on what science is telling us, that we would give people a little longer shelf life to begin with. But we have to understand that, we've seen the effects of fly-by-night. We've seen what fly-by-night has done, or we've seen the ineffectiveness of fly-by-night, right? Have we really given a chance to seeing what long-term sustainable behavior change looks like? Maybe some have explored it. Maybe some are doing it now, but it has to go from some to the majority really to be being able to look at these longer term, more sustainable tools that help young people change behavior, right? Again, we're focused on behavior change. So that's going to translate into actual acts, or it's going to translate into the response to the things that they come across and deal with life. So what people view as big wins don't necessarily align with me, because I can tell you that I know a kid today who won't shoot you if you look at him the wrong way, but he would have yesterday, right? But we've done enough behavior change where he no longer views that as a threat up to here, where now I got to take your life for it. He might still say something to you about it, right? Or he might give you a dirty look, or he might walk away now. Right. But again, that is a significant behavior change that might not necessarily get caught. It gets caught in the number that doesn't get recorded, because that's one less shooting or one less homicide that didn't happen. So it doesn't get recorded. Right. But those are the kind of wins that we see each and every day. Those are the kind of short-term wins that we see with young people after 12 months. Or after 6 months. Man, when he first blew up, he tore his building apart. He ripped everything off the wall, tried to bust all the windows, but we didn't call the police on him. We used CBT and we went and had a conversation with him. Bro, what was that all about? Right? And then we followed up and had another conversation about it, because we know that was a trauma response. That's not who he is. That was his trauma coming out and what happened, right? And if we turn them away at those points, that's when we fail. But that's why it's so important to understand the brain science and the connection of trauma to the actual behaviors, because then it opens it up for us and allows us to be hopefully a little more understanding. You know, the stages of change are there for a reason. Like, there's really different stages of how people change. And so I think the more we help people understand, you know, the benefits of the longer term investments and what we could see, I think, you know, we'll start to see more people willing to give it a chance. We're seeing it now, but, you know, because short term is just not working.
Yeah, I would just add that, right, that the education has to go to the funders too, right? And that's what JT is saying too. Like, we've clearly been really transparent with our funders and people that we're talking to about the same information, right? How do we, everyone wants science-based, like evidence-based stuff. Well, like, I mean, it's pretty clear here about how the brain works, and that you want, someone who dropped out of school in 8th grade to have a GED in 6 months. Like, it's just like not going to happen, right? So how do we actually set realistic expectations? But also part of what we did early on was try to document everything. Like, what does it actually take to engage young people who don't want to engage? So we could put that together. JT mentioned it takes 18 to 24 months to even start seeing real behavior change, right? Like significant behavior change. It can take, 9 months to really even engage someone, to get someone like attached enough, right? And so we show that too. We know it takes 8 to 9 or 10 to 12 in some places, knocks on a door, bangs on a door to get 2 contacts a week. But that stuff is documented, and that's sort of like what we use to show people. They're like, no, really, because if we don't do this, then we're actually just still missing the group that everyone says they want to serve, right? Like, we're missing this population, and we're just serving the ones who can show up for the 6-month program. And so if we got to kind of line up what we want with what we have to do to serve them well.
Thank you so much for that. I think Roka's just done an absolutely incredible job in documenting that, putting some language on the videos you all have done, and just resources on your site, and just in the talks that you share around the time this takes to make this. There is science, there is data, there is reasoning behind this. I know James was putting a webinar or an upcoming kind of webinar that we're hosting on September 6th at 1 p.m. The Ready, Willing, and Able: Applying the Stages of Change to Working with Individuals at the Center of Community Violence. JT just kind of mentioned that the stages of change piece. So just want to encourage people to register for that and hear more. I had also, in the mix of all these resources, added in a profile that we had done on 3 street outreach organizations, one of them being Roka, titled Safeguarding Communities by Reaching Out Relentlessly. And the article starts with a quote that was from one of the participants that just said, "You wouldn't go away." And I think I've always heard that in JT's remarks, but this idea of the time and commitment this takes to reach the population that everybody is looking to serve, particularly the funder community right now. And that it really does take time. So both is just the model that Roka is offering, but also the way to articulate that message around the time that this takes. They have a tremendous amount of resources that, I know we have linked to that are on their website to really show that. So we really encourage you all to do the same and take a look at the article, which is just a different perspective than what you've heard today. And we can gather them together and make sure that we send it in a cleaner way than the chat, to make sure you all have the resources you need. I know I have kind of 1 or 2 more questions, but I just want to make sure I'm also inviting people to please raise your hand, unmute, put any kind of questions or comments or your own models into the chat to make sure that we can hear from you and learn from you as well. And I think while I monitor that, I've received a few individual requests, and I think a couple in the chat as well, around opportunities to really learn more, to work more directly. Like, we're doing direct programming with this age group or in this community, and how can we be involved in ROCA with ROCA? So we can help you be LISC, and particularly James Stark on our team can really help be a resource to make sure that we're making those connections, that we on our end are being as thoughtful as possible around how we can help to continue this connection with ROCA learnings and ROCA opportunities. I think we now have James's email in the chat as well, but we would love to be a bridge. We've shared a lot of resources from them as well, but we see them, and everyone sees them as a true subject matter expert in this space. And you all have a way of articulating the brain science behind this in a way that is very digestible, and it does exactly what JT said for me, whereas you hear it and you have this immediate flashing of people and programmatic work where we've seen this and now have a science behind it to be able to explain and understand it more. So really just truly appreciate the words and the message you all have shared here, and we'll be sure to follow up with the multiple requests that we're getting in for continued support and lengthier trainings as well. We're still kind of inviting questions in. We have a little bit of time, but in the meantime, Anisha, JT, anything for you all as we look to kind of close up in questions, any kind of additional remarks, messages, or kind of just points that you really want to reiterate to our attendees?
I think that just oftentimes, like, the scientific part of the work gets lost in the actual work. Because I know that doing frontline work for so many years, I never really paid attention to any science behind what I was actually doing, right? And a lot of times I didn't even understand what it was I was actually doing. I was just doing my job. But when you really start to understand the connections between the science and behaviors, and just when you just really start to understand those deeper connections, it really kind of makes the work come alive for you in a different way. It's made me a lot more, I guess, empathetic in understanding young people and understanding the behaviors that I see. It doesn't take away the understanding that there is a need for accountability, but it also increases the understanding that there is a need for a lot more support, right? Because naturally, a lot of times in our cultures, in our environments, we've been taught that when you need support and handholding, you're weak, right? Or that's something that you don't want no handouts, you don't want no help, you don't want no, you know what I mean? But the reality of it is that the systems have kind of locked our young people in the way in which they need it, right? They need help. They need to understand trauma. They need to understand what's happening. And I've seen so many young people, just by simply understanding that what they're suffering from is trauma, because you have to be able to help people understand it on their own, right? The worst thing you can do is try to go in and diagnose somebody who's not asking for a diagnosis, right? You have to help them understand what it is they're experiencing, what it is they're seeing, and then help them define and label it for themselves. Because what I may label as trauma, they may not label it as trauma. You know, I distinctly remember hearing somebody tell, saying, "Oh yeah, trauma, da da da," and they said, "Man, I'm not traumatized. That's just the way I grew up," right? And that's key. So you have to be really careful with how you label people and the labels that you give people. Instead, it's more important to really help them understand their behaviors and understand why they do the things that they do. They'll come back to the label, right? But we know that all we're doing is really addressing trauma. And that's the most important part, is addressing it from an authentic way and being relentless and building relationships and really practicing and understanding all of this really helps young people have a chance for change. So, I mean, I just encourage people to just continue to do whatever it is you're doing that's working with young people, but be real intentional about making sure that we're supporting them and giving them the supports that they need that addresses the trauma, really addresses the behavior change that we're looking for.
Thank you, JT. Anisha, I will go to you next.
Yeah, I would just, I would say like, when we learned about this, one of the things, that you mentioned was, we got to learn from a lot of really brilliant folks, and we tried to really simplify it down so that we could remember it, right? That it was front of mind every day in our work, for our staff, from, everyone in the organization is trained in it and uses it. And what we found is that it helps all of us individually, and it helps us do better work with young people. But also, it's the same information we share with young people, and it is really important that they get this information too. Like, when we get to help young people understand, like, nah, it's not because you're just you, right? Like, everyone's told you all your like there's a reason that why you're behaving that way. There are situations you've been through. This is part of helping people understand why they do what they do, and understanding that there is a possibility to do something else, and having the skills to do that is deeply empowering, right? And I think, and deeply healing, right? And so we've seen that over and over again with young people. We've seen it with staff. It's just a powerful thing when people get tools that they need and information that can help you in simple ways, just sort of, realize that you can kind of do something different if you choose, and not minimizing it at all, right? It's not easy, right? It's not an easy task, but it is empowering once you can understand that it's possible.
Absolutely. And giving, the way we talk about our technical assistance work, the cross-sector teams, the partnerships that are involved in this, giving everyone the baseline understanding to make sure you're exposing the full teams to this knowledge is something that we see as so essential. I want to point out a couple of more resources, and then we have 2 more questions that did come in, but it looks like James beat me to my post here. But the last link, or the second to last link that is in the chat, is for on the BJA website, the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative checklist. This is something that LISC has partnered really closely with CNA and BJA to produce, and it includes a definition of community violence intervention, essential elements, guiding principles. We really want to share this as a tool. And one of the things we will say is there were a series of listening sessions that even led to the development of this material. And over again, one of the things we heard at those listening sessions was the understanding of trauma, how this needs to be trauma informed. What does that mean? So we really wanted to incorporate that into the checklist, which is brief. But I think looking at that and pairing it with some of this webinar and some of the additional resources, we hope will be a real value add. So we want to point you to look at that. And also just a reminder that there is another webinar on September 6th, and then a BJA hosted webinar on September 14th, which is going to really dive deeper into the critical need for community engagement and partnership to do this work. As far as questions 2 that came in, one is the PowerPoint. Yes, when we post this webinar, you will have access to the PowerPoint, which will include all of the amazing videos that you have seen in the presentation. So that will be, and as soon as that's live, we will share that to you and it will be available. We also have a question from Larry Johnson around how many participants were involved in collecting the data, and was it conducted in every region in the US? So I think what he's referring to is the data that you all had shown around, discussed around the timelines and how long this work takes.
So I'll just briefly say, you can see all the outcomes reports on our website. Also, there's a whole outcomes page. We do evaluations for each of our program sites. So each site has an individual evaluation. We do overall evaluations each year for the site. So each site, some of the sites are smaller satellites, some are bigger. The bigger sites serve up to 200. The smaller sites serve, 150, somewhere around there. It can vary. We have multi-year evaluations that have kind of done some studies of, couple hundred to, I think overall last year, Roca served close to 1,000 young people across all of our sites. So there's some cumulative reports. There are some individual program reports. There are internal outcome reports. We have a lot of external evaluation reports by external providers, apt, and then some larger studies that we've done. And no, it's not every region in the U.S. It's only at our program sites.
That's in Massachusetts, Baltimore, and Connecticut. So right now like I said, we're a 4-year model. So we're just coming up on our 4th year, or just completing our 4th year in Baltimore. We're serving probably about 250 plus young people right now, or young men. Baltimore's a young men site only. So we're serving about 250 plus young men here. And a lot of them are coming up. Well, our first cohort has just reached their first 4-year mark. So that data has been, produced, and whatever they do with the data, it's been done now. So it's interesting.
So just to add a little information about it, we have, because it's such a long-term model and behavior change takes a long time, we have a lot of tools. We have a lot of performance indicators that we track and measure internally. But our long-term outcomes, the 2 long-term outcomes that we posted and we show, come from external data. Like, so in Massachusetts, it's from the Department of Unemployment and Department of Corrections data that's pulled to kind of correspond with our data. So it's not self-report. And the external evaluation folks who do that are able to pull that data. So we're using, we don't do RCTs, but we're using state data to assess the differentials in recidivism and employment that we're able to achieve through our model compared to other sources in the state.
Terrific. Well, I think James and I have responded to the few questions that have come in. Just want to take this opportunity to invite anyone to unmute with any remaining questions, or if anyone from the LISC Safety and Justice team has any comments or questions that they want to add. Well, we are available for any follow-up. We will be in touch with the requests for follow-up that we received. Anisha and JT, can't thank you enough for the prep time and developing this for this audience, for the time you're taking today, and just for your ongoing partnership with LISC. It has been an incredible opportunity to work with you all. We know how important this understanding is, and we just really value our work with you and just appreciate today and just the ongoing partnership. So thank you again to you all. Thank you again to everyone who attended, and we really look forward to being in touch soon with the continuation of this series that we're bringing you related to CBI.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we will be in touch soon. Thanks again.
All right. Thank you all.